Okay, let's take another introductory look at a part of the supernoetics model. And for this, I've chosen an interesting title: Why do people behave absurdly and destructively? It's a kind of brief science of thought and behavior, but of course it's a huge subject. So I've got to tell you, we've got thousands of articles and lots of materials on this topic. But just for a sort of teaser and overview, which I hope you'll find enlightening, by the way. When I say teaser, I'm not going to hold back. I'm just going to give you as much as I can in 30 to 40 minutes. But you'll realize this is part of a whole series of videos, of course, I'm sure. Isn't it true that people seem to, it's proverbial that people behave against themselves, they act destructively, they're their own worst enemy, is one of our expressions. They take a life of potential joy and wonder and screw it up. And isn't it so common? We've all done it in parts of our lives anyway. Things like, marrying somebody is totally unsuitable. You can never be happy and have a good family relationship with this particular person. Or you get the right person, but then, you give in to infidelity and that screws things up. There's financial folly and reckless health behaviors, people drinking until their livers are wrecked and so on, underperforming at work so that nobody would ever seriously take you as a prospect for promotion and so on. It's just what people are like. It's a huge list. I'm sure you can think of plenty yourself. But why? Why do people do these stupid things? And the answer in the main, I'm not saying it's confined to, but is emotional override of reason and intelligence. We do stupid things because of stupid, irrational emotions, really. So it's tempting to see emotional folly as the cause, that's the problem. But you've got to ask the question, where does the emotional folly come from? Let's go a bit further back, okay? Here I'm going to introduce the concept of emotional charge. It's like sort of negative mental energy. I'm not going into, where this energy, energy is a physical phenomenon, okay? Matter and energy, space-time and so on, those are physical. And emotion and spirit and mind may be further back than that. I'm not going to get engaged in that just at the moment. Let's just keep it simplistic and say it certainly behaves like energy, even if it isn't energy, and it can mess up things. It's like getting sugar in the gas tank of a car, or petrol tank for you folks over in Europe. But then again, you've got to ask the question, where does that come from? So let's back up first of all. Let's put in the basic here. What's the mind for? What is a mind? What does it do? And I'm not interested in how it arose, right? I'm not getting involved in any of those debates and things. Just what does it do for us? Well, I boiled it down to this, really. It scans the present environment, it compares it to knowledge and experience, that's the past, makes estimations of the future, so what's likely to happen from this situation, and based on experience, it takes action that's appropriate to the postulated intention. And that last part's important, because we're all doing different things for different reasons, so you have to know what it is you're trying to do before you can decide what action would most appropriately lead towards it. It's quite simple, actually. This is based on the idea that the mind isn't making mistakes. It may be what comes out wrong is because it's fed with the wrong things. Let's assume the process is like a computer. If you feed a computer junk, of course, you get wrong answers. But if you program it properly and teach it to, you say what is 2 plus 15, it will come out with 17. It knows the answer, okay? So in that sense, you might think of the mind as being somewhat perfect, but it's very important what you feed into it. And in these introductory videos, I've laid quite a lot of emphasis, in fact, on data. That's knowledge and learning data, but of course they're experiential things too, which can be just as much garbage. Let's take an example, and I'm just making this up. It's not based on anyone. It's based on 40 years of experience. Let's say you're on the street on a dark night, maybe it's raining, and you're about to step out off the curb into the carriageway. But you see a bus roaring towards you, a big red bus in the near side lane. You pull back and you don't step out. Now, why? Well, because you've got a memory store that's filled with helpful stuff about large moving objects, you know, squashed them like splat, you know, squashed tomatoes, crushed fingers if it's you ever caught your finger in a door, big hard metal objects, bang, you know, hitting yourself with a hammer. You can pretty well figure it out and predict what's likely to happen if this bus would have smashed into you. It would have hurt, to say the least, if it didn't even kill you. So, you know, in a sense that you can tell how it's, you know, it's going to damage you. You can put the pieces together and predict what's going to happen. You can predict how it's going to feel. So this is what I mean by estimating the future, okay, and taking the appropriate action, which of course is to pull back from the curb edge. But what if you got some bad data in there, some garbage in the computer? You know, you got this obsession that God will save me, as if, you know, God is looking out for your back if you're dumb enough to step in front of a bus. And by the way, I don't mean to give religious offense, but anyone who believes that will have to explain away all the people that do get killed. You know, God wasn't looking after them in that sense. Do you see what I'm saying? Or the person might get silly and say, right, you know, I'm going to go for it. This bus driver will stop. I can put my intention in, you know, like Crocodile Dundee. I can force my intention into his mind and he will put the brakes on hard. Or I'm going to run. If I run quick enough and round the outside, you know, as long as there's nothing in the outside lane, I'll be good. You know, I'll be good. Let's do it. It's risk-taking. Well, of course, you will see from these examples, you could be facing total disaster, by which I mean splat on the pavement. That's you. Okay, now let's add another layer to this, okay? Let's say once years ago you once witnessed a messy, fatal accident. Somebody did get run down by a bus, you know, blood everywhere. You'd actually long forgotten about this, but because your subconscious mind hasn't. And so this time when the bus, that you step back, but the bus passed you by inches and nearly, you know, you jump back quickly, but it didn't get hit. But it was enough to scare you and make you go, whoa, and you become very anxious. I hope this example you can generalize into thousands and tens of thousands of experiences that you've had in life that sort of roll along these lines, okay? So you had this sudden, you know, scare. It's okay, but you're a bit shaky now. You might get a headache, you know. You start to feel nervous about things, all kinds of things, you know. You don't like traffic all of a sudden. So you become slightly irrational, right? I mean, traffic's fine as long as you're careful. But you don't know it, but at this stage you've started to suffer from a negative emotional charge, basically. And it can grow, you know, you can become very anxious and nervous, irritable with people. You get headaches, you've got fear of traffic, you don't like to go outdoors, you know, agoraphobia. It can get worse. You are now suffering from very typical human emotional dysfunction, and it's everywhere. Wilhelm Reich called it the emotional plague, and he thought it was worse than bacteria and viruses. Emotions screw us up something rotten. Okay, now let's go and look at the work of this guy, Richard Semon. He's German, so that's how you pronounce it. Back in 1911, he published a famous paper about something he called an engram. Now, I don't want you to get this mixed up with Ron Hubbard's and Scientology use of the engram, okay? This is a biological, medical science thing. In fact, there's a very famous paper published in 1950 by a biologist, a psychologist called Carl Lashley. It was called In Search of the Engram, and he was chopping up brains and seeing if he could find where it was. I mean, it wasn't anywhere. Ultimately, now we would say, if anything, you know, in the physical part anyway, that it was in the neural network somewhere, you know, a diffuse thing. That's just keeping it physical. I'm not going into the idea of mind, higher and non-material, even though it's something I believe it is, okay? Anyway, Ron Hubbard produced his Dianetics book in 1950, just after Lashley, so, you know, maybe Hubbard just took the word without really being sure what it was. But basically, here is a situation with something being rammed into your mind, kind of forced in under the radar. It gets to influence your future choices without you really knowing it's doing that. It's subconscious or hidden, okay? And you've got these problems with, you know, with traffic and with headaches and with worries. Now, you're not necessarily crazy, but you're suffering from what I call short-range insanity. You know, about traffic and about going outside and going on the street, you're a bit cuckoo, okay? Alfred Korzybski called it un-sanity. You know, insanity would be crazy about everything. I mean, nobody's crazy about everything, but you know what I mean, serious. Danger to themselves, danger to others. Possibly very crazy, but he called this, that's insanity, he called this un-sanity. It means in respect to certain things. And it's a bit like a computer software package that's got some kind of bug in the program. You know, it runs through the loop, and every time the software does a run through, this glitch throws out something strange. And of course, this is what humans do, and that's how they behave. But it's based on these hidden negative emotional charges which are held at the subconscious level. Typically the person is not aware of them. Okay? But now here's a killer truth from supernoetics and the science and the method of mind that we've got. We call this indirect charge. Okay? It's not the obvious. You know, it's coming from hidden and coming from behind. The origin of the trouble is never what the person thinks. Okay? If it was the real cause, the trouble would go away, and it does. It just evaporates like magic. You know, so you'd say, you know, you nearly walked under a bus and I've been scared ever since. Oh my God, I almost got knocked down, and that's the explanation. But you're still scared of traffic, so it isn't the real explanation, right? Somebody might start, you know, very clever, might say, what about this earlier time, you know, when you saw somebody killed? Oh my God, that's probably the real shocking upset. That was it. But no, it's not even that. Let me tell you, and this is the big discovery. Wait for it. It's a time when you were a child of 4, your cat ran out under a bus and it was squashed, you know, like splat. Plus, you know, mama smacked you hard for letting the cat onto the street, shouted at you, called you an idiot. So in this event, there's sort of pain, surprise, loss of your pet, of course, so there's loss, injustice, all kinds of negative emotional stuff. But it's all buried, you know. The point is that this early incident was deeply buried. Unless you have some way of getting at it, you'd never come across it or never suspect it. But the killer is if you find that earlier incident and then you re-experience it and release it, it clears, the negative emotional energy releases. Freud discovered this back in 1890 something, published a brilliant book on it with a guy called Joseph Breuer. Very famous book. It's called Studies in Hysteria. It wasn't so much about hysterics as the fact that if you can find the hidden origin of some strange behavior or strange thoughts, once it's contacted and accessed consciously, the person doesn't have to manifest that anymore. So it's a miracle, right? So in this situation, you would need a very skilled hypnotist to find that early event, and even then, you know, it might be missed. And if it was, you can't clear the trouble because you can't find the real indirect charge, and it's buried down layers, okay? And as I said, if you find the real charge, it goes away. That's the magic part of this discovery and formula, right? Once you know where it comes from, you don't have the problem anymore. You are no longer scared of traffic. You're very confident. You no longer get headaches or are crabby and miserable or feel terrified every time a red something or other comes thundering down the road, okay? It's as if what we need is some kind of clear button or delete, you know, that erases that hidden engrammic pattern, to go back to Ricard Simon's terminology. Or to use another computer metaphor, it's like doing a reinstall without the bug, you know, you put in some fresh software and the bug has been cleared, and of course the person's in a very much better mental state than that. This is a core truth I want to share with you. As I said, it's a big E, hundreds of articles, you know, thousands of pages of material, so you know, we're talking about developing huge life skills, but just in brief here, this is a teaser, an introduction. There's a very powerful truth here at the core of supernoetics, transformational psychology. If you find the origin of the emotional charge, it evaporates. You don't have to do anything like tapping, you know, energy psychology and telling yourself affirmations. You don't need to sit for 30, 40, 50 hours spieling on to some counselor. It goes like that the moment the person sees it. It's virtually instantaneous. It comes out in a flood, often with laughter, because these things, of course, are destructively irrational. So there's often this ha-ha moment, never mind aha moment. The hidden memory then becomes accessible, so can no longer perturb your thinking. Now, I know Freud isn't very popular these days, but he did discover this very important phenomenon. If it's hidden or subconscious, it can screw you up. If it's once made accessible to consciousness, it doesn't screw you up anymore. So ergo, if you are still screwed up, you still haven't found the origin of the indirect charge. Okay, this is very meat and potato stuff, but if you get it, actually be really excited, because I read about this kind of phenomenon, and I actually quit medical school for 3 years to go and learn more about it. I was so excited, it's such powerful impact on psychology, behaviors and so on. A wonderful discovery that I've been able to reinforce myself hundreds, if not thousands of times in the subsequent 40, well, 50 years almost. We could, using modern sort of new age terminology, we can say it's cleared or clearing, or it's erased, it's vanished. We've refined it and refined it, but I do like to acknowledge old Freud. He was, all his sexual libido and stuff, that's all bunk probably, but discovering the power of hidden memory, he should be immortalized forever with that. And we have a way of, by the way, making this work better. It's a brilliant, insightful system. It's like GPS for the mind. That's what it's been likened to or compared to. It really does, mean major breakthroughs, but I'll have to tell you more of that in a later video. But I hope you found this interesting and insightful, and thanks very much for listening. Take care.